Hello, welcome to the September 22nd, 2023 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo, and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you have not attended a livestream before, how it works is you can submit questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de or simply ask the question in the chat field. When asking questions in the chat field, sometimes if you're pasting information from another program in, it may not show up. So maybe just if you type in the chat field, we'll get through those chronologically. If you don't see an immediate response to your question, realize that sometimes I may be 20 to 30 minutes behind the live chat, but it will go through all the questions chronologically as they come in. So if you don't see an immediate response, if we could try to refrain from asking the same question repeatedly, that would be appreciated. Just kind of slows down the process. And several hours after the live stream ends tonight, we should have a index with timestamps for all the topics that have been covered in today's live stream. So you could look for that. And if you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com. And there's over 27,000 topics that you could have within to search for, and you could immediately go to that particular video with a hyperlink. And I do have this in a Word document. If people want to reach out to me, I'm happy to send a Word document with that. And I pass it on to Jazz Dude, and I think you may be able to put it on the Cubase Nation Discord, perhaps. And we want to give a special thanks to Jan at Stockholm for creating the Cubase Index website, so you could search for live stream topics and go directly to the video. Also, we want to give a special thanks to Jazz Dude and Agent K for their work as being moderators on the live stream. So they're not Steinberg employees; they just really do this out of the goodness of their hearts. And we'll give Jazz Dude a special kudos for his work with the Cubase Nation Discord, which is a wonderful resource for the Steinberg community. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America. I primarily focus on Steinberg products, and I'm presenting from outside of Washington, D.C. area in the United States. So if you are watching live, or even if you're watching afterwards, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. It's always fascinating to see where people are checking in from around the world. And with that, we will go ahead and get started with questions. All right, so we have a question from, I guess, Keiko. Hello, Greg. What is the best way to program the sustain pedal for a piano track? So many times, if you're just kind of playing in parts, so say if I have this, I think I have a sustain pedal underneath here. Is just if you record and just hit the sustain pedal, that will be recorded. But if you want it to just physically draw in the sustain pedal, the MIDI CC message is, you want to go to CC64. So when you come over here, and now if we wanted to just, let's draw in some notes here. So now we could just draw in sustain pedal information. So it's basically going to be kind of on or off. So if we wanted to just be able to all you'd have to do is, just grabbing like your line tool or pencil tool is just to kind of draw in sustain pedal information, or just, record it in. So if I wanted to come and record directly within the editor, come here. And then you could just kind of draw the sustain pedal or just play it in and capture it that way. So it's probably the easiest ways to do it. So once again, that's going to be just controller 64, MIDI continuous controller 64. just go ahead and delete. All right. Okay, so we see from DDP Music who asks, "Hi Greg, sometimes when I'm recording a VSTI or MIDI track, I have the edit window open. I record a new take to add more notes. I get a new empty segment on top of the first one, but the new notes are in the first segment as it should. The issue is I have to delete the empty segment. I can't figure out why this is happening now." All right, so let's say I'm in this part, like I'm in this editor here, and we will go to our MIDI record modes, and we have, so if I wanted to merge notes on top, so let's say I'm in the editor and I'm going to have this record in the editor enabled. So as I record, all right, so I recorded new notes over top, and we can see that these are the new notes that I just played. It was my 20th century composition there. So we can now just record that. So make sure that when you go into your MIDI record modes, that you just have it set to merge, and that within the editor itself that you have record within the editor turned on. All right, so we see Uno Momento checking in from a dark but warm Finland, where it's 22 degrees Celsius. All right, wonderful to see Jazz Dude on. Wonderful to see Jan from Cubase Index on. We have Stefan checking in from Sweden. We have Matt Elston checking in from London. We have Nick checking in from UK and Essex, if memory serves me correct. Always a pleasure to see Dave Glick from McLean, Virginia. Hope you're doing well. And we will, I'll send you an email so we can get together for lunch. It would be wonderful to catch up, Dave, in person. Great to see Ted Springman from Los Angeles on. All right, so we see, according to Jazz Dude, that the Word document is directly downloadable in the Discord as well. So, the whopping 2 megabytes. So, okay, so we see from Soren, says, "Greg, my quest to get text from the Steinberg product of Vocal Chops indie pop vocals has begun. I created a 2-hour-long Cubase project with 880 loops after each other. I want to use SpectralLayers. Takes forever to start up. I think it has crashed. Should I make 880 tracks with the loops, or is one track with all the loops the way to go, you reckon?" So I would probably do one track, and then, you could just click on the add events. So let's say if we're here in SpectralLayers, and it could be a lot of processing that it's doing. So let's say now that when we go into SpectralLayers here, you could just click on add event, and I would do that, and that should kind of do it for all the tracks. But maybe break it down into 100 tracks to start with and see if that is more manageable. Depending on your computer system. I'm not sure if SpectralLayers is really utilizing RAM for the transfer between the different parts, but maybe try 100 events on a track and see if you get the same behavior. But I think doing on one track would kind of make sense, but you may want to just kind of break it up to make it a little more manageable. See, Soren likes my serious experimental genre music there. So yeah, when I was in college, we would just, if someone played out of key, we would just say that they were playing in modes. Oh, it's very modal. It's like saying your composition when no one liked it was interesting. So, all right, wonderful to see Neil Conway from Oregon. All All right, we see Rick Ballantyne. We're graced with Rick's presence. Wonderful composer from Charlotte, North Carolina. This is here for tricks and tips and to learn from the master. I think Rick is a pretty masterful composer, so if you get a chance to listen to some of his pieces, check him out. All right, always great to see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas. And we see that it's our virtual ice cream will have begin our distribution. He wants people to whack the like button. All right, so we see Mark Rabin's having a rough morning, just trying to pull out of the nosedive. So we hope you're doing well and get better soon. So anything we could do to help, just let us know. So, okay, so we see from Best Korean Jesus saying none of my messages show up. So we see this one. So maybe if you're copying and pasting, or if it's if it is doing so maybe if you're copying and pasting, maybe just try typing the message. That would be, and see if that makes a difference for you, Best Green Jesus. And I don't know if I mentioned, but always great to see Robbie Bowling from Dallas, Texas. Thanks for being on. It's been a long time loyal Cubase user, so appreciate that. All right, we see from Mark Rabin that Stella says woof to everyone and is wondering why they're not fetching sticks. All right, so we see from Best Korean Jesus saying they'll ask again, maybe make sure that he doesn't repeatedly spam. So yeah, just go ahead and ask. We'll let some questions come in. All right, we see that Nick, I think this is the first time maybe we've gotten a virtual dog bone for Stella, Mark Rabin's dog. So it's very kind of you, Nick. All right, we'll see if we get some more questions in. All right, so I know we had a question that was sent in advance, so let me get to that. Get my mouse to wake up here. All right, so we had a question about how to use the legato mode on how to use legato mode for a vocal file and the sampler track. Okay, so I'll remove this extension here. So let's say we have a vocal track here that we're working with. So we'll just listen to this vocal. Na, 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 na. Na, 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 na. I started losing sight. All right, so let's say I want to make this into a sampler track. Okay, so I'm just going to drag it into the file. I started losing sight, my place. All right, so we can now. Now, one of the things that we see that when we have legato mode, if I, many times when we work on something in the sampler track, that if I play the note again, it starts directly from the start of the sample. But we could also just kind of turn on, I'm going to activate audio warp, and then we're going to put legato mode on. So if I hold down the key, so I'm going to hold down, let's say the initial key, but as I play a different key, what will happen, and since we have this on audio warp, when I hit a different key, instead of the sample going back to the very beginning, you know, to start from the beginning of the sample, it will continue to play on. So with legato mode enabled, I could come over here.
I started losing sight my place. I started losing sight my place.
So that way we could do, instead of, if we take legato mode off and
I started losing sight my place.
It would basically just kind of start at the sample from the very same spot, but with legato mode on. And if I keep the first key held down,
I started losing sight my place. I started losing sight my place.
it will continue to play the sample and play the sample at the new pitch in time without having to go back to the very start. So make sure that you hold the first note down. If it's separated, it'll start at the beginning. So if I come here, but if I hold the first key down, we could just have great results where we could just kind of play in different harmony tracks as needed. All right. All right, so we have some more questions to come in. Okay, so from Camping and Road Trips, the question is, hi Greg, when I open Cubase and add an audio/instrument track, the inspector only shows chords, equalizers, and inserts, but then I click on chords, everything opens up, including audio, sends, etc. Okay, so we'll just do a new project here. So we'll create an empty. All right, so let's say we're going to add an audio track. Okay. So it says, so add an audio track. The inspector only shows chords, equalizers, inserts. But then when I click on chords, everything opens up to include audio settings. So maybe, I'm not sure if, you know, if you have other tabs, if the tabs are open or not. So, you know, you could open multiple tabs just by, so if you come over and hold down the control or command key, and then we could scroll up and down between the different tabs, and maybe they're not visible. But if you just click on one, make sure that, like, perhaps these tabs aren't open, and you know, maybe they're just not visible because that's all we're seeing. So, and at this point, you know, we could pick and choose which particular tabs. So maybe once one is activated, that it's showing up. So again, but maybe you just have kind of multiple tabs open and it's not apparent. But if you kind of click here in this area, you could close the tabs to have one tab. So maybe just try to make it so that only if you see the tabs that are open, just to maybe close all the tabs and see if you see all of the different parameters available for you. So let me know about that. All right, so we see Mark Rabin just saying Stella's ears hear all, and she leaves when it's out of tune. So sounds like a good dog. All right, so Rick Ballantyne asks, Greg, is there a way to set up a default view in the left pane with the controls I access most? Some disappear when I open, say, the fader, and I have to reset the view to see certain parameters. So I think what you could do is when you go into the setup, so let's say I want to see like inserts, or let's say I want to see sends, and let's say track version. So one of the things that you could do is if we go to the setup window here, let's go to our setup window, and we could just say, okay, I want, one of the things is you could see to make all your different parameters visible. But let's say I always want the fader to stay open regardless. We could just come over, and then if we click on let's see, we could pin it open. So as soon as we kind of have that open, we could say, okay, now when my fader is open, opening other stuff will always keep that particular, so when we open different inspector tabs, that the fader won't collapse. So if it's not pinned and we open a different one, the fader will collapse. And we could collapse it manually, but as we open up different ones, we can see that those particular functions that particular inspector tab will stay open. So just kind of click on the settings, go to setup, and then so if you say, okay, I want my chords to always be visible, click in the pin area, and now my chords and fader will always be visible regardless of what other inspector tab is opened or closed. So try just, if you haven't experimented with pinning of the inspector tabs, you could just, again, go to setup and then select the function that you want to be pinned. And then I think you would just click here in the pin, and we could just have those particular functions pinned like that. That way they'll always kind of stay open. So let me know, Rick, if that makes sense. Okay, so we see from DDP Music, it says follow up, I don't have the record option in the editor window, Cubase 12 Pro. So if we have, let's say we add a quick instrument track here. So if you don't see the record in the editor window, so whether it's going to be kind of a full screen or whether it's going to be here, just we could go to the setup, and we'll see, let's see if it's going to be, if we go to setup here, we could just maybe it's default items. Let's remove. So make sure that it might be listed under default items, and make sure that that's in the visibility column if you don't see it there. But if you're in 12 Pro, you definitely have the record in MIDI editors. I think that was introduced in version 10. So let me know if that shows up for you, DDP Music. All right, we see Michael Teams is giving Mark and Stella 1 gallon of Moose Tracks ice cream. All right, my chat field just jumped on me, so let me find my spot. All right, so we see from Uno Memento, just says a little refresher on SpectralLayers might be in order. Okay, so when we deal with SpectralLayers, what's kind of unique about it is, as we work with audio files themselves, if we see our waveform, and if we look at our waveform and we do, we apply an effect to it, if we cut part of the waveform out, so let's say I come here, I cut, erase, that this is working across all frequencies. So I cut the low frequency content, the mid-range, the low mids, the high mids, the highs, etc. So it's cutting all the frequencies within the audio. What SpectralLayers is going to allow us to do is to do processing and do editing that is kind of frequency dependent. So when we come over, and we may, if we kind of just drag this down, we can see our audio waveform here. And as we scroll up, what we see is the lower part is our low frequencies. So you can probably see that these will be our kicks. And we can see the hi-hats, the snares, and often what we see is going to be kind of the harmonic overtone series. So if we wanted to be able to just do editing, not on all the frequencies, but I wanted to take out those mid-range frequencies, we could come over, and now when we listen to it, so this way we could edit the individual frequencies very easily. And as we do this, there's a lot of, pretty cool things that you could do with that, whether it's going to be, you could be doing stuff like, there's a guitar squeak, and I don't want to take the guitar note out, but I wanted to take the actual squeak out of the particular note as well. So at that point, we could just take out particular frequencies within the audio file. And then there's, more stuff that we could do, such as doing our, extracting a voice from the audio file. So if I wanted to take the vocal and isolate it for further processing, or make the vocal louder or softer, we could do those things within SpectralLayers quite easily. All right. All right, so we see a question from Romaine. Hi, Greg. Glad to join you all here. My question, Cubase 12 Pro on Apple Silicon MacBook Pro. I used the Electron Overbridge VST to get USB audio from an Electron Syntact. It just worked like a virtual instrument. When I activate the optional outputs of the VST, all tracks are stereo. Is there a way to route these to 2 mono tracks? Thanks for your answer. So if you wanted to, split the channels, so that's what the instrument is outputting stereo. So that's, if the instrument supported left mono out and right mono out, it would show up as being, inside of Cubase. But let's come over here and say, we could send it to different groups if you wanted to, but it's just how the particular instrument itself is designed to output to stereo. So let's say, all right, so I could, if you wanted to split it like to left and right, I could, let's just add 2 group tracks. I guess we could maybe duplicate this track. And let's send it to a group. Let's try just a stereo group for now. All right, and I'll send this to a stereo group. All right, so we have kind of the same source here. And let me just... All right, so I'm going to send this to group 1. And let's send this to group 2. Okay, and we can take our groups here. Pan that one. Pan that one. Let's add 2 audio tracks. Or I'll just add a mono track. And we'll set group 1. And let's add an audio track and let's send it to group 2 as its input. So now, if we come over here, we'll just monitor these. All right, and let me just... All right, so we got the left channel there. All right, so we're going to take this B-box output, and this is going to, let's see if it could, so it looks like it's still going to be tied. So, you know, another way of doing this is if you wanted to split it for left and right, you know, is maybe just to come over here. Let's do a render in place. So we'll go to our render settings. And just hit render. We could have, let me just get my panning where it was previously. So again, render settings. We have our stereo track. And then all we'd have to do is get a project and we could say, you'll see convert tracks, you'll say multi-mono to stereo, and then you could just split your left and right like that. But again, it's the instrument itself is kind of what's dictating the outputs. But you could just, you know, render in place and split the channels. It's probably the fastest way. Okay, so we see from Michael Teams, just says, still having trouble with Groove Agent dragging drum parts into the project. Sometimes it drags it to the track. Sometimes it goes off into ether. Not sure where it has gone to. So, you know, I mean, it's always been pretty straightforward. So let's take a look and say I have my pattern pad here, you know, so as you know, so we can see vertically with the line, If I drag it up here, I could just drag, and you see where like the blue line is right above my cursor. That would indicate what track it's being dragged to. So make sure that you're just dragging it where the white line is showing the vertical and the blue line. So you think of the white line as showing where it's going to, the white vertical line here, what point in time it's going, and the blue line just above the cursor is showing which track it's going to be dropped onto. So if I drag it over here and I see the blue line is on the pad shop track here, it's going to be placed there. So you do have kind of a visual indication of placement, time placement with the white line and the blue line indicating which track is going to be where it'll be placed, like that. So look for those two indications. So we see from Camping and Road Trips says, thanks, Greg. All tabs are closed. Only 3 are showing. So, take a look also. Like I haven't run across that, but, see if when you go to the setup and, see if all of the different inspector tabs are in the visible column. Sometimes when stuff like this happens, sometimes another method that can alleviate kind of like strange oddities like this is to disable your program preferences. So like when you start Cubase, if you'll hold down, if you're on Mac, Command Option Shift or Alt Control Shift on Windows, and you start the program and keep those keys, start the program and hold down Command Option Shift or Alt Control Shift. And then it'll ask you if you want to temporarily disable the program preferences. If you choose yes, see if that will start you with a fresh slate without deleting all of the kind of little internal preferences, and see if that makes a difference. But it seems strange that they show up as soon as you kind of click on it. So, but give that a shot for Camping and Road Trips. All right, always wonderful to see Brian Sawyer Sr. from a rainy day in Beulahville, North Carolina. I think that rain is coming up to get us this weekend, so we're getting all sorts of weather warnings about storms this weekend with lots of rain. So hope you're safe and well. All right, wonderful to see Lawrence Koch from Rhode Island. Thanks for being on the live stream today. We see that Michael Teams has granted him 1 gallon of Texas pecan ice cream. All right, Gerald Ely from Martinez, California is on. Great to see Peter from Montreal on. Says he didn't get his normal Clip Cubase live stream notification, so maybe we'll have some more people sneaking in if they didn't get their notifications. So. All right, so we see that Soren says he's contacted creators of image sounds about maybe getting text files from them for the indie pop vocals library. All right, we see Peter's having a gorgeous day in Montreal with 24 degrees. All right, so we have Biswayan Day. Just says, you're awesome, sir. Love from India. Thanks for being on the live stream today. It doesn't seem like we have as many questions today. We'll just see if more people are. All right, great to see Parabot 2 on. We see Michael Teams has granted Brian Sawyer 1 gallon of German chocolate ice cream. Okay, so we see just all right, so you just see from camping and road trips says, thank you, you were correct. One of the inspector tabs was open. So all right, so we have a question by Zounds by Timo. How do you use key switches in the piano roll? So often key switches will be just triggered by MIDI notes that send the particular key switches, but Steinberg has technology called the expression maps. So let me just open up, and if you've created an expression map, and many sample instruments will have expression maps. So let's say if I come to like this little Bach piece here, so what we get to come over, so often what happens when you have various instruments is when you have your instruments open, it may respond to different, it may switch the sounds based upon your actual instrument. So if I wanted so we can see C0 is going to play staccato. If I do a key switch of C#0, it's now going to do this as pizzicato, or D0 will be marcato, or sustain, legato. So these different notes would send a key switch to tell Cubase, or to tell the instrument to play this particular articulation. So if we just, what we would have to do before is have notes that would not be based upon the actual musical context, but would actually just play the key switch. And that got messy, especially if you're doing notation, because they weren't actual musical notes. They were kind of notes for working on samples. So what we do is we can come up and create an expression map, so we could see all of the articulations that are available for a particular instrument here. And once we have that done, and if it's a Hallian based instrument, we could go to the expression maps, and I think some other instruments will allow you to do this, but you could just choose to import key switches. So here's all the key switches that are automatically imported from the particular instrument. And now we could, in the MIDI editor, say we want to look at articulations and dynamics. So each of these key switches is now laid out for us, the different articulations. We could see them labeled. So we can say, okay, I want to start off spiccato, and when I get here, I want this to be marcato, and I want this phrase to do pizzicato, and then maybe legato for this long note, back to pizzicato, and then back to staccato. So as we listen to the phrase, this will send the key switches without having to manually add notes in the key editor. So that way we could switch between all of our articulations. So a lot of instruments will have these key switches and these expression maps already built. So it's a great way to be able to, have control over your instrument, because many times people will buy an instrument that has all these different sampled options that the companies have spent a lot of time and paid, very careful attention to detail to offer this level of being able to switch between the different articulations to make it more musical, to make it more realistic. And people really didn't know how to access it. So expression maps have really kind of made that much easier to use. So that's how you can work with key switches inside of Cubase. All right, so we see Rick Valentine just saying thank you for the pinning option. That was so helpful. All right, so we see a question from Diego. Let me just clear my throat. This question is, hi Greg, after finishing my binaural mix, when I export to a standard WAV file by routing the standard bed out to the stereo out, the resulting WAV file only has a very different balance. I was always monitoring in binaural, how should group channels be routed? Would inserting plugins on the stereo out interfere with the binaural process? Tried both ways and nothing. So I think doing it on the, so generally to do this, and for people who aren't as familiar with this, so we'll start off a project and let's say we're going to do kind of a binaural process for this guitar. And if you have headphones on, you probably could hear the guitar kind of pan. So we have this set up where we'll just now come to, we can start by going to your project menu. We'll say ADM authoring for Dolby Atmos, and we'll kind of follow the prompts. You want to make sure that your project's at 48K, that it is also at a 512 buffer. So we could just kind of do these particular prompts. Now the problem gets to be, it's like, okay, if I need to send this guitar file to someone, we can see this kind of panning around the room. So if you have headphones on, this is kind of set up. And as soon as we go to once we've gone through kind of the setup assistant, so we'll just kind of but now what we want to do is, so we'll listen to that. So I have a stereo output. And when we do this, we have our renderer just monitoring as binaural. So what I want to do is to take the bed and we'll just take it as a send here, and we're going to send this to our stereo out. So as we listen to it, so, and at this point, when I go to export audio mix down, we will put this on the desktop. Okay, so we'll export our audio mix down, and obviously you're gonna have to listen to it with headphones, but let's go to my desktop. It's our binaural guitar wave, so I'm just gonna open it in, and let me just route this so you guys could hear, see if I don't mess up the whole audio system. So now we're playing it just through basically Apple Music, and let's see if I could do this sort of live stream so everyone could hear it. So all the panning is still coming through, even though you're not playing it back through. So everything was just kind of, followed the panning, and everything was kind of carried over, not playing it back through the typical, Cubase. So I'm not sure if you're monitoring back in Cubase or you're monitoring the exported file in Cubase, or if you're monitoring it with headphones in a different program. But if you could let us know, but that sounded similar to me. All right, so we see from Sarn, just says that the SpectralLayers transcriptions is not perfect and I cannot trust it. I've had ups, I've had downs. It's coming out off heads, ups, off heads, downs. I really would want the original production text. I'm actually capable of ranting about almost. It is one thing to get 6,000 sounds with absolute collection to howling and sonic, but 880 vocal loops is rendered completely useless if we're supposed to listen through 880 to find what to be able to use and get words from. I wish for a text file is super big. Yeah, so just reach out to the company and see if they may have a spreadsheet already generated with all the text. I know it's a pretty typical workflow for any dialogue recording, like game audio, if you're doing like any post-production, generally everything comes in a spreadsheet file, and that way they could switch between localized to different countries. So Okay, wonderful to see David M. from Liverpool. All right, finding my text is jumping around me. All right, great to see Dwight Cunningham checking in from the Bahamas. Glad he can make it today. And always wonderful to see John Costigan from Kenosha, Wisconsin. We see Randy Lee on. Thanks for joining us from Texas. All right, so we have Matthew Mulvaney says, hi from London. Can you refresh my memory on nudge function? Many thanks. Okay, so let me just go back to a different project here. Okay, so when we want to nudge, different elements on our project window, there's a couple of ways of approaching it. So let's say I want to we'll take this file here. All right, so if we want to nudge, we make sure that we have snap turned on, and to do this, we will just... And I think if we hold down like Control or command that we could do this based upon our snap value. So if we're right at, let's say we're right at measure 36 and we have this set to our snap set to bar, I'm just using my right arrow, and so my right and left arrow while holding down a control or command key, and we can nudge just like that. And there's also, there is a nudge palette. So let's come over here and we'll see this little settings cogwheel, and we'll say, let's just go to nudge settings, and we could see that we could nudge here just by doing this. So let's say if we set our nudge value to beat, we could also just kind of nudge. So let's take this and we could nudge kind of the ending in, and I'll just set this to quantize, and let me set my quantize value. So just so we could show this. All right, so I'm going to have this set to eighth notes for my quantized value. So now we could choose, so if I wanted to take just the end of the file and nudge it by eighth notes, or extend to lengthen or shorten the beginning of the file, we could do stuff like this, or take the beginning of a file and nudge it. Now sometimes what's an interesting, you may want to just nudge something in a different time value. So let's say we're in bars and beats, but maybe I want to nudge by 10 milliseconds without having to switch my nudge from my master time from bars and beats to milliseconds to get the values. So what we could do is we can see our nudge, and I can say I want to nudge in seconds. And as we do this, we can say I want to nudge by 10 milliseconds. So even though our primary time display is in bars and beats, as we nudge, we could just nudge in milliseconds if we wanted to. So we could decouple the nudge time divisions, the nudge values in time, what time format it is, whether it's samples, seconds, bars and beats. We could just come over here and link it to grid, or have it go to another time format and be able to nudge on whatever time format you want. But again, if we just come over here, just control plus right arrow, control plus left arrow, and I think if we come over here, we just, so at this point we could just come over and just do nudging like that. So let me know if that makes sense. But I think it's cool that we can now, I think that came in 12, where we could nudge independently of the master grid format of the project. All right, so we see from Parabot to hi Greg, are there any Steinberg VSTs or bundles to get a Melotron-ish sound? So there is a dedicated Melotron instrument. I'll just play kind of a project with it. Let's see if it's in recent. But there's kind of a dedicated Melotron instrument for Halion, and this will come as part of Halion. So just, I think I use it in the project Beatles and Stones. So we'll come over here. So it's called Haliotron. So it's kind of like very famous Strawberry Fields flutes. But if we wanted to come over, I'll just take a section here and repeat that. And we'll go through some of the other presets. So say you want more. And, you know, it's very much so kind of like your classic Melotron. If you're not familiar with the Melotron, it would actually, is kind of, we could think of it as kind of like the first actual sampler. It was actually a keyboard that would play individual tapes for each note that you played. So but yeah, in directly inside of the content that comes with Halion, that you get the Haliotron instrument. So if you look for Melotron sounds, it's a great place to be. So you got yours. Just wondering who in the chat's been using Windows 11 with Cubase Pro. So I'm still using 10 for my personal computer, but I was watching the Microsoft event yesterday. Windows 11 looks very exciting. All right, so we see Dwight Cunningham asks, Greg, what large console would you recommend for Cubase 12? So it depends on, you know, what a large console is to you and what your price range is. So, you know, a really wonderful workhorse console would be like the Yamaha DM3. That's about $2,000-ish. And I think depending if you get, there's a Dante and USB version. So that's a, you know, full-blown digital mixer. It works as a control surface. It has, you know, 16 mic preamplifiers. And I think 6 outputs or 8 outputs. It's very compact. It has its own built-in DSP, so that could function as an audio interface over Dante, which is kind of passing audio over Ethernet or via USB, depending on which version you have. If you're looking for just like control surface functionality, you know, you have to ask how many faders you want. I use a CC121. I also have a Chord Nano control that has 8 faders. A CC121 is a single fader device. I use both of those a lot for different things. So for mixing, I often will use the CC121 fader to be able to drive everything. But let me know if it's more for a control surface or if it's for a mixer that needs to function as a standalone mixer as well. But, you know, check out like the Yamaha DM3. The Yamaha TF consoles are also great choices. The DM3 is kind of brand new and probably has a, you know, much, you know, more contemporary technology included. All right, so we see, Greg, is there a technique for writing a mod wheel curve for multiple tracks at the same time? So let's come over, we'll do just a quick new project here. All right, so let's just say okay, so I'm just going to take this and let's duplicate the track. So say I wanted to I have sounds loaded up. All right, so when I come here, I have 3. Just make sure I duplicate the wrong. Okay. Okay, so if I want to do this on 3 tracks at once, I could just simply record. This is something a lot of people just kind of don't think of. Let's say I record. And I have all those tracks record enabled. So now when we want to look at, so I recorded the same modulation data across the 3 tracks at once. So we say, okay, we'll come over here, we can see all of my modulation CC data. I go to, the different track at this point, any of the tracks that we look at as we double click, we could record the same CC data. So often I find it, and if we wanted to do a change, so let's say I have a ramp here that I wanted to apply. So what I could do is select these CC. Let me just find the points here. Okay, so I wanted to take like this CC data and I copy it. And then I could hit Alt or Option plus V, and then we could place it into kind of the same time position as the original was copied from. So if we come here, we could just now go to a different track and say, okay, I'm in this track, and hit Alt or Option plus V, and then we could just replace the particular MIDI CC data. So even if we've just written one in, copy it, and instead of just pasting a normal Control or Command V, use Alt or Option plus V, select the next track, and then you could just simply paste in the same CC data, or just record the same CC data across all 3 tracks. Okay, reading through comments. All right, just see speculation on Cubase 13. All right, so we see from OEW, have I missed the obligatory? When's Cubase 13 going to be released? Needs to be soon. Too many AA plugins to buy otherwise. So All right, so John Osorio asks, "Hi Greg, question here. There's a function of automatic fades. It's in the project options, but I can't make it work as expected. Please help." So when we have an audio file with automatic fades, let me just create something that we might be able to hear. Okay, I'll just go to, I'll put just a quick test generator on. Okay, so we'll just record a little bit of the test tone. Okay, so I'll take, all right, so now we listen to our test tone, and if I don't have it monitor enabled, okay, so we could hear, so when we have the auto fades, when we, a lot of times when people think auto fades that it's going to actually, so now we can hear that this is going to fade in over time, and we see it visually. So what the auto fades is set to do, and we can access the auto fades directly from here. And we'll say, let's just do an auto fade in. I'm going to make it last, let's see how long I can make it, let's say 100 milliseconds. Let's make it 500. Let's see if we can do that. Okay. So default to 10 milliseconds, and we hit OK. So as we would, okay, so we're going to come over here now. When I hit play, you could hear that it's going to fade in, and you could see how it's actually, we can see the fader. So before we set the fade position, it was just going to be a constant value. Now that we've written in that fade from the beginning, so we'll let the meter kind of die. So we'll see that the meter will increase as it goes up. So the intention of the auto fades is we don't see it visually, but it's actually applied every time a clip starts to play. It will have just a very short, subtle fade in, fade out. And this is like really helpful if you have cut audio. This would allow you to have kind of seamless transitions. So if you've done an audio edit and maybe you weren't exactly on the zero crossing, or you weren't able to do the edit at the zero crossing, what this can do is once the auto fades is turned on, we could have that kind of automatically fade in and fade out based upon the time. So as we listen to it now, and then we'll see that you could have kind of those seamless transitions with the auto fades turned on. So that's the intention of it, is, not that you see it visually or edit it, but that when you do an edit, it doesn't cause like an audible click, that often it will serve as kind of a transition fade in, and that's what the real-time fade ins are really kind of set up for. So let me know if that makes sense. All right, so we see from Filter Freak, any news on Cubase 13? So as soon as it's available, I'll be able to share lots of news on it, but generally Steinberg doesn't announce stuff before it's released. There's obviously a lot of speculation that was, people were expecting it to be earlier, but just, rest assured, as soon as it's released, that we will do a very detailed live stream kind of walking through it, going through all the features to show you everything that's new once it's out. All All right, so we see from Diego, just says, I did what you explained here, but when you have different beds, not only one track, like your example, the balance is all over the place, did get better turning off all the near, far, etc. So, let me know if you have multiple sources or multiple beds, because, in Cubase you have like one bed, but you have multiple beds in Nuendo. So, and realize that once you're doing it, it could be, when you're, trying to, do, your conversion, that, it may sound different. And it's just kind of the nature of binaural audio. All right, so we see, Greg, how are you expanding Cubase in full view and then moving the mouse on top or bottom to reveal the Cubase menu and the taskbar, or is this only a Mac thing? So I think it's a Mac thing currently, and it's just a Mac preference. I don't think it's the same in Windows. So when you go to your system preferences in Mac OS, you could choose, just see if I could... It's like in dock and menu bar that you could choose to the menu bar automatically hide the menu bar and show the menu bar in full screen. So that way, that's just kind of a Mac OS thing. So at this point, but we know people on Windows want to be able to do that as well. Always wonderful to see Gareth from Spain. Hope you had a nice flight back. I think maybe you went from Liverpool back to Spain. Glad you could join us this afternoon. All right, so we see from Sven Isaacson how to import projects saved, exported from Cubase into VST Live as songs, not as projects. Projects in Cubase and VST Live are completely different things, of course, there and back again. So I think, they are two different formats because, there's information in Cubase that's not needed inside VST Live and vice versa. But I think the intention is to be able to, if you needed to do editing quickly in one, that you could get the data back and forth to do edits, and not necessarily to have every project setting. So it's like you could take your Cubase project that's pretty much fixed, and at that point export it as export it into VST Live, and then if you're in VST Live, it's like, oh, I really need some, I want to do very audio editing on this vocal, that you could take the VST Live project into Cubase and then do further work from there, and then export it back. All right, so we just see from Midnight Shadow, hi Greg, can you show some tricks we can use with vocals like stutter-like effects, for example? Okay, so let me just close this project out here. So one of the, great plugins that you could do this with is, just go to, so there's a great plugin called Loop Mash FX. So we'll come over, and I'm just going to put this on as an insert. And you'll find it under Other. So you see loop mash FX. So we could kind of put your pulse, or you want it to be eighth notes, and this will allow you to do all sorts of, and we could actually play this in real time from a MIDI keyboard. So just
Na 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 na.
so we could do like just different.
I started losing sight by play. What dimension am I in?
So if you say, okay, I want to do like 16th note chops,
In
or you want to do like almost like, so as we're just kind of, or if you wanted to just kind of capture a range. So this way you can kind of do a sample and hold. So all sorts of different effects that you could do using loop mash. And again, what you could do is just come over and say, I want to add a MIDI track. All right, and we'll call this loop mash. And I want this output to be routed to loop mash. So we'll find our loop mash, and now we could just come over and play our different effects here using a MIDI keyboard. So I'll just find the right MIDI range here.
I started living side play.
So just have that MIDI track.
Am I in the end? In the end.
So all sorts of different effects that you can play just in real time. And you could actually interact with musically with the MIDI keyboard. So once you have loop mash as an insert, add a MIDI track, and then you can play, set the output of that MIDI track to loop mash, and then you could play and do different stuttering and different vocal effects. Let me know if that's helpful. All right, David Walker asks, hi Greg, if I reinstall Cubase Pro 12, do I have to reinstall all plugins and VSTs, or will they still be there from before? Sorry if this appears twice. I thought I had asked it already. So you don't have to reinstall all the content. So if you just reinstall Cubase, the content is installed separately and independently. So at that point, you could uninstall a program, reinstall the program, and it will, automatically look in those spots for the content. So no worries on having to reinstall all the content. Okay, so okay, so we see Gerald Ely says for the mod wheel tip, nice and simple. Thanks, Greg. So, all right, so we see Nick has to head out, so and is hopefully going to be back before the end of the live stream. If not, he wishes everyone a good weekend. Wonderful to see Daniela Tokan on from Germany. Thanks for joining us. All right, and we have Ibikun checking in from Nigeria. Thanks for joining us. see, Gareth just says to do is to be from Socrates, and to be is to do from Sartre, and doobie doobie do from Sinatra. So that's a good tie-in. All right. All right, we see Gerald Ely just saying the option plus V, the paste at origin, is the tip of the day for him. So. All right, Gareth is wondering if anyone would happen to know the technical name of the quick connect connector in an Epiphone push-pull system. So, if anyone... All right, so we see from Daniela Tocan, Greg, do you know if I need more licenses for Cubase than for 4 PCs? Is this possible? So you could run, your Cubase license is with Cubase 12. It currently works on 3 different computers, so that it could be installed on as many computers, but you would have to only have 3 activated at a time. Let me just clear my throat one more time. So you could have it installed on many computers and just choose to sign off or sign on in the Steinberg activation manager. And you could do it remotely if needed, but at that point you could run it actively on 3. If you need to put it on 4, you would just have to deactivate it on one of the 3 computers to run it on the 4th computer, but you could dynamically choose that as you need. All right, so we see Club to Breathe says just saying hi. It's great, and it says missed us a lot, so we're glad you can make it today. All right, so we see Julio Osorio ask, totally makes sense. Thanks, Greg. Can the auto fades be visible? I think it's possible, but I don't know how in case you wanted to edit a particular crossfade. So the auto fades aren't visible, but you could set the fade type. So once we're in our auto fade settings, you could choose, okay, I wanted this to be sinusoid fade in. I wanted this to be, logarithmic fade out, and you could see. And for crossfades, I want it to be, equal gain, equal power. We could adjust your different functions there. So these would be the shapes that are automatically applied during the playback, and this is, applied during the playback, but they're not visible to edit. If you wanted to edit, then you would have to choose to do a clip gain, and we could edit those by just double clicking, and you get basically the same parameters. So you don't visually see them for editing, but they're really just kind of set up for fixing a lot of, like, oh, I'm playing this and there's a lot of edits and I'm hearing a lot of pops, or like when I start playing back an audio file, it'll pop. The auto fades kind of negates the need for doing a lot of manual fades. That's really kind of the intention of it. All right, wonderful to see Razel checking in from Denmark. You see Gareth is in dad joke mode, so he always makes me laugh. So. See, Gerald is asking, anyone deal with Logic users who hate Cubase? Just tell them that that their program is cool if that's where they're at. So that's always a good line. So, but we'll be friendly to them. We don't have to be as insecure. All right, wonderful to see Captain Energy Music. Glad you could make it from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania area. See, Gareth is happy to see Loop Mash, says it's the best thing ever invented. All right, so we see Ubikin asks, Greg, can I import a Dolby Atmos audio mix back into Cubase and use stereo out as an output mix in a new project? So Cubase doesn't have the ability to import an ADM file. Nuendo will have the ability to import an ADM file. So it depends if you have the if you have the mixdown file, or if it is, often when we create a Dolby Atmos deliverable, we'll call it a deliverable, like what you would send to the theater or what you would send to a record, or a distribution service for your Atmos, you would deliver an Atmos, like what's called an ADM file. But that ADM file, Cubase doesn't import it. But Nuendo will. So at that point, if you wanted to import ADM files, you would, Nuendo is probably a better solution for that. All right, my chat field jumped. All right, so we have Pablo on as well. So wonderful to have a hot mess reunion of Pablo, Gareth, and Michael Teams and myself. So wonderful to have you on, Pablo. See how happy Gareth is. See, Pablo is in the tour bus with no Cubasers inside. He's feeling alone. So glad that you could join us today. So Dwight Cunningham just says, Greg, thanks for the information. I like to mix with physical faders if possible. So, one that's, one that, is probably a nice build quality. I think that looks pretty nice is maybe the SSL, was it UF8? And that's like an 8-channel control surface. It kind of works as Mackie control as well. And I think that's a pretty robust DAW controller, as well as like having really nice faders. And if you wanted, if someone was coming over to your house to watch you work and pay you, and they want to see something expensive in your room that they don't have in their room to justify them paying you, then maybe an SSL UF8 might be a good choice. And that could be a little more expensive, but it might be, functional similarly to, I think Behringer has like some Mackie control type controllers that with 8 physical faders as well. So, those would work as well. So it could be, if you're very particular about the feel of the faders, or if you want it to look really good to impress other people, or you just want functionality just to grab something for mixing, the Behringer may fit the need for that. And if you want it, and also check out the Yamaha DM3 if you needed a full console as well. All right. All right, so we see from a question from Daniela Tocan. I need much more activations to buy. Is it possible? We run virtual machines and cluster them. So all you would need to do is to buy more licenses. So for every Cubase license you have, it could be, you could run it on 3 different computers. So if you need to run on 6 computers, you could have 6 different Cubase licenses. Or you could run 2 different. You could buy 2 Cubase licenses and run it on 6 computers. You may have to actually authorize it on different My Steinberg accounts, but you could do it as a single owner, have multiple Cubase license. All right, so we see Gareth just says possibility of Woohoo being finished before the end of this year. So, yeah, I assume that's maybe a track you want me to play bass on. So, anytime you get projects sent to me, I'll be happy to do them. All right, Chatfield just jumped. All right, so we see from Camping on Roadways, will Cubase ever introduce clip or session view as is Ableton? I see a lot of other programs are kind of going that way. I don't think it's really gained them more users or integrated well. So generally, Steinberg doesn't just put something in the program for the sake of having something that's not kind of deeply integrated. So I haven't, we'll see what new features are, coming in future versions. I know that, Steinberg is aware that other companies are doing it, and there's a certain level of customer expectation, but we don't just do stuff off. Steinberg often doesn't do stuff as a me too, just to have a particular function. They usually, it's really well deeply thought out and deeply integrated so that it makes sense within, we don't want to necessarily take, one aspect of a workflow from another program that doesn't really fit into the existing, very deeply entrenched workflow as well. So. See, Gerald Ely says he'll take my advice on talking to Logic users. Tell them they could always come to the live stream and check it out because they probably don't have their own live stream. So. All right, so we see Michael Teams just says that he sent Moon to Ted for the mix. We'll see what he does with it. So sounds good. All right, so we see from Julio just says, question, Greg, I find a chord track as an amazing feature, but I'm sure I'm not using its full potential. Can you show some of its magic, please? All right, so the chord track is really good, especially like coming up with an initial idea for a song. So let's say it's really easy. We've all seen, the guitar player that every time they pick up the guitar, they play like the same chord pattern. You see people that sit down at the piano and will play the same chord progression and same chord pattern. So it's really easy, realize that, chords are very much, we can get into musical ruts with chord progressions, and there's, expected chord progressions that we see in jazz, that we see in blues, that we see in rock music. So it's pretty common. So let's say I wanted to start off with an idea for a chord, like a song. So maybe I have a drum loop, and I just want to start off putting in some chords here. So let's say, okay, let's put in, and I just have this playing through like a Rhodes. I'm going to add, we'll start the key of F. And I want it to end on a C7 chord, and that sounds good. So let's say I don't actually, I don't have a chord idea for the third chord. So one of the things you could do is just double click and go to the chord assistant. We could look at this based on common notes. We could set different levels of complexity. So we can say, okay, let's look at common notes, and it could give us, okay, maybe we'll try a G minor chord. And we could see how that sounds. Now let's say I'm going to give this to the guitar player, and they don't like the key of F, and I want to transpose. I could select the chords, go to the root key, and now we could just transpose. Now if I wanted to take these chords and kind of change the voicings for the chord, we could come over here and say, okay, we want it to have more kind of, I want these for basic chords. I wanted these for guitar voicings, so that the lowest note will be an E, let's say. And we could also set up voicings where I want it 4-note chords or just triads. So all sorts of different functions that we could do. We could have our different chord functions. Now if I wanted to drag these down to a track, we can now just make kind of block chords with that. We could also just select the track, go to your project menu, and say let's go to our chord track, and we'll say create chord events, or not that, but we'll say we'll go to project, to chord track, and we'll say chords to MIDI. And now we could just see how our chords are laid out for us. So at this point we could, now where the chord track could get interesting is we could actually take an existing song and we could tell each instrument to follow the chords or not follow the chords. So let's say I have, so I want to take this, so what I want to do now is we'll just come over and say, okay, I want to take this. Let's say now I could start and say, let's go to, I want this to be in the key of G. And the next chord, I want it to be in E minor. And we could just try out kind of different chord progressions. So as we come here, and this gets really interesting also. Let's say if we want to have like maybe an orchestral thing, and someone's like, yeah, I really want something Bach-like, but not Bach. I'm afraid that someone will sue for copyrights, which is always funny when record companies sue for copyrights on classical pieces. Like Bach has probably been 350 years in the public domain. All right, but let's say I'll just open up a quick project, and we just wanted to kind of change some of the aspects of the chord track. So when we're here, we'll just so being that we could have the different tracks follow the chord progression, I'll come over, let's make all these a little smaller. All right, so we listen to this and we have, let's say, our chord track. And as we look at it, we can see, okay, it looks like we're in G major. All right, so let's get a little more creative and let's say, oh, what would this be like if these two chords were minor instead? So now we could listen, we go from a very strong G major tonality to, and instead of having to go through each track in our project and change it, let's say I want to go to the relative minor here. So let's say instead of the E minor, I wanted to go to G. And let's say as we're playing, I wanted to transpose these up. So we'll listen to the transition. And every time we do this, all the MIDI notes move. So I didn't like the transition. Let me go back to the original. So you can get, you know, where people wouldn't experiment harmonically if you're in a large sequence because, you know, like you go through, if you miss like going from like G major to G minor and you go through 730 tracks and you missed one B natural, it's so much effort to do that. But having the tracks follow the chord track, at that point we could use this and just change the chord and have all the tracks automatically follow that. So there's some cool things you could do with the chord track. All right, wonderful to see Rob from Tarpon Springs, Florida. Saw an interesting travel show on Tarpon Springs with all the Greek culture. I was thinking of you. All right, so we see from Club to Breathe. Let me just scroll back up. So Club to Breathe asks, audio performance panel, how does it relate to CPU usage and how the ASIO Guard works as well? All right, so when we look at this, a lot of people think of this as CPU usage, but, you know, depending on how processes, and basically, you know, and every DAW will work the same way for this. When we open up our audio performance meter, and this isn't a CPU performance meter because they're really kind of two different, you know, two different settings. So when we have our CPU meter, it'll show us all, like, you know, if we have a 12 core system, you'll see like your CPU processes across 12 cores. Now, if you have one core that's totally maxed out, that's going to affect your audio performance. So a lot of times when people take a vocal track and they put 16 plugins on a vocal and inserts, that one vocal track is going to be limited to using one processor core. And it's just how processor cores through operating systems are allocated. One instrument can use one processor core for the most part. Like our Halion instruments and Halion Sonic can use multiple cores, but for the most part, most, like 98% of instruments will utilize one CPU core. So you may have 12 cores, and then if one of them is getting totally killed, your audio performance meter is going to rise up. Now, one thing that also makes a difference with your audio performance is latency. So your CPU performance doesn't take into account the latency of your audio system. So if we go to your audio system here, we could look at our control panel, and as we do this, if I lower my latency, let's say to 32 samples, the lower the latency, the more responsive it is, but the more CPU intensive it is. So as we play, you see that my CPU performance has gone up, and as we play, and if I switch to 512 samples, that CPU is going down. So we're still utilizing the same CPU cores, but when we're running a much lower latency, we're asking the DAW to work much harder to, think of it like if you were, like I think of this maybe an American analogy, but like the classic I Love Lucy scene where she's working in a factory and she has to put so many items like in the box, and each box has 4 items that, and she gets behind because she has to put 4 items into the box as the conveyor belt is moving. But if you had a box with 16 items, you may get 8 in quickly. You could take a little breath, get 4 more in, take a breath, and get 4 more in, and get it done. You may have longer times, more of a buffer for all the audio information to get processed. So your CPU, if you're running lower latencies, that's going to affect your audio performance, but it doesn't really affect your CPU because you still have the same amount of CPU usage. Now, where ASIO Guard comes in is, when we go to record a particular instrument, see now that I recorded this, we could, you'll notice that the CPU meter will go up. So we see our peak meter go up, because what we need to do is when ASIO Guard is enabled, it allows you to run kind of a hybrid buffer system. So when we go to our ASIO Guard, what this means is that the tracks that are record enabled or monitored will be running at the lower latency, because those are kind of the more critical tracks. So if you're tracking with plugins, these tracks will run at lower latencies, and the other tracks will run at like a multiple, I think it's a multiple of 4, at higher latencies, so that they don't have to work as hard. So with the ASIO Guard enabled, if I go to start, recording a number of tracks at 32 buffers, you see that going up. But we see kind of like the overall, and that's just because we're telling this to kind of prefetch the audio processing so that we, so even within the same project. So ASIO Guard allows you to run only particular tracks at the lowest latency, and the other tracks run at a higher latency, so that you could have more tracks and be able to track in a much more kind of practical manner. But only the tracks that you're recording will kind of utilize and take advantage of the lower latencies, and everything else will be kind of run at a higher buffer size. So a lot of people like to equate audio performance with CPU performance, but they're really different. And the big thing is your buffer size, because the buffer size is dynamic, and it will affect how much of your audio performance of the CPU's capabilities and how the plugins and the processes are being utilized across the different cores, how that's being used. So let me know if that makes sense. All right, so we see VST sound monitors well, but goes off when the record button on the transport is pressed. No problem with audio tracks. All right, so let me just create a scenario here. Just jump to different project. All right, and this could be maybe set All right. I'll just drag this track down here. Okay. Right. So there's the VST sound. I guess it's a VST instrument. Monitors well, but goes off when the record button on transport is pressed. All right. So let's say if it's, I'm not sure. Let's say we have our VST instrument, and we go here. So I'm not sure if you're overdubbing. So let's say if we have this, and it could be your MIDI record mode. So let's say if we go to like new parts, and I come here, so I just kind of play those chords. I'll play notes lower. So we'll listen to these notes here. All right, now I'm going to record something lower, and I have it set to new parts. All right, so we still hear the original, and if we come here, let's say I have this on replace. Then I don't hear the existing part, so I'm not sure if you're overdubbing MIDI events, but check what MIDI mode you're in. If you're creating new parts or if you're merging, you should still hear the original. If it's set to replace, then the whatever was recorded there before would just simply get overwritten, and you could undo it and still have your data back. So let me know if it's from Anupam Ray. So we see a nice comment from Paul Claridge. Says, without Greg, I may have went to another DAW, but now I've learned so much from these sessions. It shows how powerful Cubase is. Thanks, Greg, for all you teaching. So you're welcome. Just glad to help people along their creative journey here. Okay, so we see from Torsten K. Could you please explain how to mix reverb to vocals in a Q mix for my singer? I only hear the reverb on all instruments, including the singer. What am I doing wrong? All right, so let's go ahead and let's go to this project. I'm sure I've destroyed it switching Melotron sounds. So let me revert it. Okay, so let's say we have our vocalist here.
We played our records into the night.
All right, and we'll just listen to this.
I turn it up, you wouldn't mind.
All right, so what we want to do is now take, let's get to kind of our larger mixer, because now we will come over and make sure our Q sends are checked. So we'll come over here to our Qs. So let's say we want to take our vocalist and let's put it into our Q send here. All right, so I want this track going to our Q send, and I'm going to take the reverb. So say as we play here, find our vocal. just...
Box is ready to leave. Our musical history laid out on the floor.
Okay, so I'm going to take this reverb and put it into the Q.
What's mine and what's yours? 'Cause now you're asking Beatles or Stones. Something about that just sounds so wrong.
So let's say we're going to listen to everything. So I only have the reverb and the vocals going into the Q mix. So I'm going to go to my control room.
We played our records into the night.
All right.
I turn it up, you wouldn't mind.
All right, so we'll go to, like, let's say, our Q mix 1.
Guess all along I was so naive.
So now when we're doing this, now one thing that it could be, so make sure that the reverb is going into their return. One thing that could also affect this, like during the tracking process, is if you go to your studio setup, make sure that you don't have direct monitoring turned on. So you go to select your audio interface. Make sure that direct monitoring isn't turned on. If direct monitoring is engaged, and this could also be turned on in the control panel or mixer for your audio interface, if that's turned on, the signal as they're recording goes directly from the input to the output of the audio interface so that there's no perceived latency. And if it goes directly from the input to the output, it's bypassing the software mix engine, and then you're not going to hear the reverb until afterward. So make sure that you're not in direct monitoring, and that the reverb plugin, when you go to the return channel, that the return channel itself is going out to the reverb, is going out to the Q mix. So if I go to my control room now, you can say, let's listen to the mix, and this should be exactly what your singer is hearing.
Now you're asking Beatles or Stones. Something about that just sounds so wrong.
So check those things, make sure you don't have direct monitoring turned on, and that the reverb itself is being sent to the Q mix for the vocalist as well. All right, so we have OGI or Ogi from New York City. Thanks for joining us. All right, it's always great to have Pablo on because he can authentically call me La Leche without me feeling like he's just calling me milk. So. Okay, so you see Gareth says I already played a bass line on a track, so well, send me some new tracks to play bass on. So sometimes I don't remember the names because but if I hear the bass line, I would go, oh, that one, But yeah, looking forward to getting some more songs from Michael Teams or Gareth. So. All right, so we see just a question, when should we expect another upgrade? So, rest assured that all the Steinberg team is working hard always on new stuff. So, and generally as a rule of thumb, we don't comment on releases until they're actually released. See, Pablo's happy to see John Costigan on. See from Paul Jones says, hi Greg, really liked your video you did with MIDI mapping using all the parameters in a plugin. Game changer for me, as you can trigger from MIDI. From Paul Jones from Pembrokeshire in Wales using Cubase 12. I'm glad the video is helpful, and thanks for being on the live stream today. We hope to see you on many more. Okay, so we see that Chord Assistant was impressive. Is there a way to lock the notes in an instrument track to the notes in a chord a la third-party plugin scaler? All right, so let's say we have a chord track. I think we have a chord track here on this particular project. And if we wanted to lock notes, we don't have to use a third-party utility. What we could do is just come over, and we can do this within our, we have a scale assistant. And here we could say use the chord track, and we could say just snap pitch editing. And at this point, I can only move to notes. I can't move it to a note that's out of the scale or out of the chord. So we could just come right over here, and here I can move it chromatically. So I'll just kind of blow this up, and I can move this chromatically. But if this is set to snap pitch editing, and we're saying use the chord track, it's only going to go to notes and skip the notes that are out of the scale or out of from the chord track itself. And then if you wanted to filter notes, you could come over here and say, I want to show pitches only from the scale assistant. So now I could only see notes, I could only draw notes in that are restricted to the scale. So in case you're, really afraid of accidentals, you could do that, but you could already do that kind of using our scale assistant functionality right there, so without any third-party functionality. So, and like as we're talking about deeply implementing features and functions throughout a program, that's what you see kind of, that's a good example of the chord track and how it ties into chord pads as well, and going into even the chord track working with Very Audio. Pablo wants me to add more cowbell, so. See, Uno Memento says, why is everyone always clamoring for new updates? I understand that improvements are being developed all the time, but for me, it'd be enough to know how to use even this older version properly. So we all like fresh, new, shiny things, even at Christmas. So we're all guilty of it, I think. So, but I think it's always great to appreciate what amazing functionality we already have, and that learning something new that maybe was that you weren't aware of that could save you a lot of time is a wonderful feeling as well. See, Gareth has labeled my piece Bach in black, so. All right, you see Pablo was looking for his ice cream in Galicia, even though it's a bit cold there for Michael Teams. Okay, sorry, my chat field jumped on me. All right, so we see question, how can I sync Cubase 12 to an external MIDI clock from hardware sequencer or other application like Mac's MSP on Mac OS? So you realize that MIDI clock is, really unstable. So once we have digital audio, MIDI clock won't properly synchronize a digital audio sequence or anything digital audio. It's very coarse resolution, so you're looking at 24 pulses per quarter note, is it? And with audio, we're often dealing with 48,000 samples or up to 192,000 samples per second. So while some sequencers will, there are some DAWs that, will follow MIDI clock, it's not really properly synced because we need to resolve the audio clock. So as we're doing that, we don't want to necessarily create something that plays out of time, because creating something that starts and maybe occasionally looks to see if it's in time isn't really properly in sync. So the best method for this is just to come over and have the external device, the external drum machine, the external sequencer sync to Cubase. So when we go to our transport to synchronization setup, what you want to do is just go to destinations. We can send MIDI clock right out, to the device. And once you kind of come over here, you say, okay, I want to just say, okay, let's go to our MIDI clock destinations and wherever that device is connected to. But that device is not capable of providing enough information or at a resolution to properly sync the audio. So and I've seen a lot of videos where people are demonstrating this, and like they're taking, a one measure drum loop and repeating it for 30 seconds and it's like, yeah, it syncs great. And then, but they don't go for like 5 minutes. So that's why we want Cubase to be the master timecode source and have it generate MIDI clock, which is a much coarser, a much less, it's a very much a low resolution synchronizer, and Cubase can play in sync internally and transmit the MIDI clock out to the device, as opposed to a low resolution device driving the master timing for everything, causing everything to be out of sync. Okay, so we see from Chris Hallam, how long could one continue to update their OS and hang on to an older version of Cubase? Is there a cutoff when Steinberg stops supporting an older version? Is the key just not to update your OS? It could be slightly different for Mac and PC. Some operating systems, we won't name them, may have kind of a business model of planned obsolescence where stuff just gets cut off and doesn't function. And at a certain point, it's hard for us, you figure, how many versions of Windows 10 are there? How many versions of Windows 11 are there? Let's take like the last 3 or 4 Mac operating systems. So I'm probably on an old one, but I'm on, 12.5. So figure there's a 12, a 12.1, a 12.2, 12.3, 12.4, 12.5. And after, and then 13.1 probably through 7, and we have Sonoma coming out soon. So we have to go through and test every one of those systems. So at a certain point, it may still work, but we may not say, okay, we're going to go back 28 different revs of an operating system ago for the quality assurance testing. So, a lot of times it may work. There could be some functions, like if you go back to Windows 7, you can't create export a video with the sound in it. So stuff like that, some functions may not work, but a lot of people will be doing a lot of stuff on Windows 7 still because they're like, oh, my system works, it does what I need to. But so it may function on earlier operating systems, but Steinberg may not go through all the quality assurance and test for much more like very earlier operating systems 5-6 years ago. So what I personally do is I try to keep the operating system I had on my computer, because I know that, and try to get an operating system I know will have some longevity. Windows 10's been out for a long time. I still run it on my personal studio computer. And on my Mac, this is a work Mac, the IT department chooses which OS I get. So see, Gareth says, as far as he knows, Cubase 5 will still work on Windows 11. So I remember talking with the Wavelab developer, Philippe Goudier, And he told me that Wavelab 1 will still work on Windows 11, so which was written like right as Windows 95 came out. So. All right, so we have a question from Paul Jones. Hi, Greg. Is there a way to MIDI map a function to scroll through FX plugins? Thanks. So I'm not sure if you want it to. We'll give it a try. So let's say I'll add an audio track here. So I'm inclined to say no, but we'll give it a shot here. So let's say I expose all of these. So I think that if we expose them all, using, we could, so if you want to do, if we wanted to kind of navigate between all the plugins, I think we could maybe do that. Let's give it a try. But it may not select it. So let me just come over to my nano control here. Okay, so I want this function, and let's see if we just make it do like a mouse pointer. If we apply that mapping. Okay, so we go to our plugins, let's expose. No. So if you want to go through here, it's probably still going to be faster. I don't know if a MIDI, we could control the parameters in a plugin, but, checking from your list, you may just want to use like the mouse scroll wheel. But let me know if I'm misunderstanding about this. But if that's what you wanted to accomplish with that, Paul, just let me know if you want to see kind of all your plugins in a list. But I think probably, here we could scroll and then just click once with the mouse to select that the mouse may be kind of a better solution than using a MIDI controller for that. All right, so we see a question. Hi, Greg. Is there a setting to lock the takes of a stacked MIDI part so I won't shuffle independently from its part when moving around the timeline in shuffle mode? Thank you. Okay, so let me just create a quick stacked recording. Thanks for all the wonderful questions from people. Hope everyone's learned something new, and if you've learned a new tip or trick, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done that. I'll try not to be too annoying and hit you over the head with it. But it allows us to continue doing these live streams. All right, so I'll just do a quick and let me just check my mode. I'll just do stacked here. All right, so we have our stacked Just make sure I have this. Okay, so we have our stacked notes here. I'll go ahead and copy this a couple times. Let me just change the color of some of them so we can differentiate. Okay, so all right, so setting to lock the takes of a stacked MIDI part so it won't shuffle independently from its part when moving it around the timeline in shuffle mode. Okay, so let's say if I have these stacked, and I'll just open up the lanes here. We just make copies of. All right, and I'll just do kind of a different stacked record mode here for this one. Okay, so now let's put it into shuffle mode. All right, and I'll just change the color of this. So as we come over, we'll open up all right, so it looks like it's. So one thing that you may want to do, all right, so let's say I'm going to duplicate this track version. So I think what it's doing is it's just treating that. So I'm going to duplicate the track version. I'm going to grab my glue gun and hold down my Alt or Option key. So let's grab glue gun here over top. Okay, so we have kind of our original in this track version. Then I've glued them together, and let me just change colors here so it's more obvious. So at this point, if we take those and flip them around, let me just. So just make this larger so when we look at it, we'll see kind of the differences. I'm not sure why the colors aren't taken. All right, so you see this one on the second beat has 2 notes, and I do my shuffle mode that we could do the shuffle mode. So maybe, and let me know if I'm misunderstanding, but maybe take the original parts here, duplicate to make a new track version, merge those together, and then you could just kind of flop those around and do this way. It's all in one single part, and then you could just do the typical shuffle mode for all of the notes that are within the different lanes. But let me know if I'm misunderstanding. So we see it was the chocolate on a conveyor belt in the I Love Lucy. So thanks for the reminding me of that. See Pablo just saying Mac and Windows, I think they need to work together. So I think both operating systems are great and they both suck. And once you accept that, then everything's good. They just do it in different ways. See Club Debris says, very nice to know how it works with the audio performance panel on ASIO Guard. All right, always great to see Michael Pierce on the live stream. All right, Gerald Ely asks, what's the difference in using either a group channel or a VCA fader? Okay, so a group channel kind of sums and, will actually process the audio. So if we want to do effects on a group channel, we can, but a VCA fader is really just kind of controlling the volume and doesn't sum the actual track. So let me come over here and we'll show this. I think I could maybe show it on. All right, so let's say so I'll just enable read on all these tracks. Okay, so let's say I have automation going on. So if I wanted to select all of these tracks, and a very typical thing to do is to apply compression on a group. So I'm going to add a group channel to the selected channels. And as we do this, we'll see our group channel. So I could control the volume of all the tracks with my group channel. And with my group channel, I could say, let's put on for all of the sounds will be sent here, and I could process them. So I want to come over and put it through an envelope shaper. So let's say we want more attack. And so right now we're processing all of the sounds of the drums. But let's say I have a reverb on my snare. Tracks, I'm going to go to my snare. And let's add a reverb. And I'll just make this a little more obvious. Okay, so we have like a way too big reverb on our snare top. Okay, so what happens is now when we have a group, I bring the group down. And depending on if you have your reverb, depending on if we have it, let's say pre or post fader, let's say, we could, as we bring down we could affect the gain structure of the reverb going to the tracks. So if I bring down my fader here, if I have tracks that are kind of going up and down, we notice that we could kind of change the overall tonality of this. But what a VCA fader does, and we can see that we have the existing automation on all of the tracks. So I'm going to just come over here. We'll get rid of our, get rid of the group, and we can use groups and VCAs together. But what we could do now is we're going to right click and we'll say add a VCA fader to the selected tracks. So as we play, just undo that. All right, let me just revert this quickly just to show you. So when we do a VCA, the VCA doesn't sum the signals, and the VCA is going to work better if there's existing automation like we see on these tracks. So when we have automation, so we'll select all my drum tracks again. I will put it into quick link, and let's enable read automation. So now we're playing. So I'm going to take all of the tracks and let's send them to a VCA fader. So now as I adjust my VCA fader, we can see that I bring my VCA fader tracks that were going in contrary motion. You'll notice that some of the tracks are going up and some of the tracks are going down. So as I bring my VCA fader, it's going to, if I move it down, tracks are still going upward, but it's being kind of attenuated. So I'm going to automate the VCA fader. So come here, let's say as we go through our, so I could increase the gain on all the tracks. And this doesn't affect the gain structure of tracks that are going to aux sends, like to effect sends. So I bring in, so now I can control existing kind of independent automation levels. And again, we're not summing, we're just kind of controlling the volume of these particular tracks. And when we go to look at our automation lane for our tracks, we could see that, oh, when we do this, we have the original automation, and then we have the automation here of the result of the VCA fader. So this way, if we want to take all the drums and not worry about, if we link channels together, often they will, move proportionally, but only in the same direction. So if I link two channels and I move them up and one of them was previously going down, it's going to override that and take the automation in the same direction. Whereas a VCA fader, we could route multiple tracks to the VCA fader and they could be going up or down at the same time. If we wanted to consolidate the automation from the VCA fader, we could now, when we go to our VCA fader, we'll see this little drop down menu, and we could choose to combine the automation of the VCA fader and the linked channel. So we see the existing automation here, we see the automation of the VCA fader, and when we combine those, this is the result of the changes. So if you have a lot of existing automation, you could use the VCA fader and that automation is going in contrary motions. Use the VCA fader to raise or lower the overall volume of a number of different sources. And it will still maintain those automation relationships. But a group won't allow you to do that, and a group will affect the gain structure. So as you drop the group fader down, it could, depending on pre or post fader settings, it could adjust the gain structure of that particular drum going out to an effects send. So you could decrease the level that's going out to the effects send, whereas a VCA doesn't do that because it's not summing the audio. But if you wanted to do parallel compression, you want to apply EQ to all your background vocals, you could do that in a group. And of course, you could run a VCA for doing automation and a group for processing on the same tracks as well. But automating the group, will have kind of a different sonic difference than the VCA fader because it can do summing. Sorry, it's a confusing topic. Hope it makes sense. All right, so we see from Romero Falcone DF, dear, I tried to re-ask a question. Which is the different of the output of the control room? Why if I put output Windows 1L 2R, I can't hear sound in mix down in real time? Okay, so generally, as we would do when we're working with the control room, and I'm not sure if I fully understand the question, but I'll give it a try. So we go to your audio connections. What I always do is I have like a stereo output defined, and we'll take each of these tracks and route it to the stereo out. So we have the output that's defined, and we go to our audio connections, and where I want to connect my monitors is going to be through the monitor section. So we leave that undefined in the outputs. We define an output here, but leave it not connected or not defined. So I'll say not connected is a better term. And we go to the control room. This is where I want my output to be connected. And you could have multiple outputs. So if you have multiple pairs of speakers, you could just now come over here and switch between your different speaker configurations. So you could just say, okay, I want to go to speaker 1. This is my second monitor source, my third monitor source, my fourth monitor source. So this way we don't have to switch each of the outputs, each of the tracks to different outputs. We let the control room do that. So this is kind of a monitoring path. And let's say, so once I have that defined, if I want to do a real-time export, so let's say I want to take this little drum part, we'll go to File and say, let's go to Export, Audio Mixdown. And I'm just going to take my stereo out. I want this to be real-time. And once we do this, and we'll just put it into, we'll create an audio track, and I say export audio. Now the exported audio is going through the control room, so we should hear it as soon as it starts. So it's now monitoring through the control room. And now our file is automatically created in the control room. So with the automation that we just did in the VCA, and we're hearing it through the control room. But generally it's going to be like, 1L, 1R, 2L, 2R. So, and I see that in the question, it's, you have 1L and 2R, so you might not be able, and you could have that if that's how your monitors are hooked up, but most people don't. Pablo is just saying reverence and revelation are great reverbs. So yeah. All right, wonderful to see Mutlu checking in from Istanbul. Thanks for joining us. Great to see you back on the live streams. All right, so we see a question. How do we close all instruments open in the VSTI rack section at once? All right, so let's say if we have a number of instruments here, let me just add some instrument tracks. All right, we'll open one more. So all right, so let's see. I think if you go to Windows menu, we'll try this where you say close all plugin windows. So once you're there, go to your Windows menu, and you'll see a close all plugin windows. And you could assign a keyboard shortcut for that if you want. So let me know if that helps you, Mitlu. See, Garrett says he wishes he could send more tracks for me to play on, but he's busy with work stuff. So understand. Whenever you have some more stuff, just feel free to send it along. All right, so I just see from, I think it was Uno Momento. Let me just find a question again. Should the reference track be taken directly from, for example, a CD or YouTube? Realize that a CD would actually be probably a more accurate representation. Sometimes when something is going on YouTube, like the CD could be, like they originally mixed it and mastered for 44.1K, but, YouTube may be playing at a different sample rate, so there could have been a sample rate conversion. There could have been, much, different types of encoding and decoding, whereas generally a CD, while it's a 16-bit 44.1, hasn't been encoded. It's been digitized in PCM format. If I had the choice, I would probably take the CD and use that. As a reference track, I would say that if your song doesn't sound like the reference, it's probably not going to be whether the reference track was taken from a CD or YouTube. Obviously sometimes, I've seen lots of tracks on YouTube where, maybe someone uploaded it with a video and you could tell that it was uploaded, like from a VHS copy on, from, maybe that the record company provided to MTV in 1983 and may not have the full impact. But I would lean towards doing a CD, and I would just come over here and just say import audio CD and extract it directly from the CD if I had the choice. All right, so Camping Roadmaps just saying greetings from Swansea. So I'll have to look that up where Swansea is. We see that there's Michael Pierce is indicating that there's weird weather in London today. So, all right, we see Pablo has to go. So wonderful to see you on, Pablo. Come back soon. I guess Swansea is the wettest city in the UK. Okay, Michael Teams wants people to whacketh the like button. All right, so we see a question from Development of a Void. If I have a MIDI drum track, how do I add a secondary snare sample to match and hit at the same time as a stock snare on the MIDI track? Thank you, Rock. All right, so let's come over. One of the cool things that you could do is, within just a MIDI track is, sending it to multiple devices. So let's say I want it to all right. Okay, so let's say I have this snare here, and I have a snare on a different kit. So I'm in this editor, and I want to double the snare that's coming from this and have it play on this particular note or on this particular track. So there's a couple ways to approach it. So if I wanted to, so let's say, okay, we're going to find our snare. All right. And one of the things I could do is I'm just going to hold down Shift and select all the notes. I'll come down here and hold down my Alt or Option key. And then after that, hold down Control. And now we could just come over and double click. Once we are here, we could change kind of the drum map setup. So I'm going to come over to this, and this is if you have something like Groove Agent, but what you could do is we'll go here and we'll go to our drum map setup. All right, so I have this on D#1. So we'll say, okay, I'm going to create a new map. We'll do a new copy of this. And on D#1, I want to send this out not to the track, but I could send it out to my Urban Ballads kit. So now as we play, I could just take this and let me load up the drum map that we just made. Let's see if that's the one. So, but we could just, let me just do that one more time. Sorry about that. All right, so it's GM map 2. And now I could say we want this sound to go out of my Urban Ballads kit. And that way this one particular sound is playing, is just layered like that. So that's one way. Another way is we could go into our logical editor. So we'll go MIDI to logical editor, and I think if we choose say copy, or we could probably just extract to track. And we say type is equal to note. Let's make value 1 equal to D1. So now I could just say extract. That will take the snare and put it onto its own lane. So now we could just say, okay, I want this going out to, Groove Agent SE. And we could have just this one particular lane doubling up the drums. So, and you could also just kind of cut, copy, paste as well if you need it. Okay. All right, we see Sable Winters wishing everyone a great weekend. Hope you're doing well, Sable. Have a great weekend yourself. All right, so we see from DJ Stats, all right, Greg, my ASIO Guard is still relatively high, and I'm having to enable high along with the Steinberg audio power scheme just to control it. Is there still an issue with the ASIO Guard? So, it's not necessarily an issue with the ASIO Guard. It's still, running kind of a hybrid CPU. It's running a hybrid buffering system. But, if your computer is close to the edge, and you don't have tracks that are recorded, the ASIO Guard really makes a big difference is when the tracks are record enabled. So if the tracks aren't record enabled, then it's not really going to be utilizing ASIO Guard. It's playing back at the higher buffers. It's just, at that point, we could be running at basically a higher buffer, and just the tracks that are set to record or are set to monitoring, they're running at the lowest latency level. So if your entire project is reaching the CPU and you turn ASIO Guard on and no tracks are set to record, then you won't see a difference. So hope that makes sense. All right, so we see a question from Uno Memento. What is the procedure if you have a project including a reference track so that you can compare these two easily? All right, so let me open up project. Got from my good friend Clay Ostwald, who I had a great time hanging out with at an RIAA event in Washington on Tuesday night. You can see Gloria and Emilio Estefan get honored. A lot of fun. Appreciate the invitation. All right, so let's take a look at so if we wanted to have kind of a monitoring source, what we could do is, utilize the control room for this. So in this project, I have kind of a large and here I have one track that's like, we'll call this a reference track. So what I have is in my connections, we go to the control room, I'm going to have a Q mix set up, and I'll just add one. So we'll say, okay, let's go to our Q mix, and we'll call this reference. Okay, and I'm going to make it I'm going to make it stereo. That would be helpful. Okay, so we're going to call this reference. All right, so now what I want to do is I will import that audio file. And what I'm going to do is on this track, I'm going to send it to no bus here. And on my Q sends, I'm going to send it to my reference, turn the reference on and send it to 0 dB. So this track, our reference track here, and I'm just going to change it with EQ because it's basically just kind of a mixed down file here. is not routed to our audio outputs. It's routed through the control room on a QMix bus. So as we come over, we have our project here. So when I want to go to my QMix, I can just come over and I'll just unmute the track. That would help. So this is my mix, and I switch to the control room. So say that's my reference track, and I'm just making it sound bad so it's different. And this is my mix, and you could just go back and forth. So once again, the reference track, set it to output to no bus. Go into your routing here and go, if you go to the channel settings, you can go to the Q sends, send it to one of the Qs and switch back and forth. And that way this, and the biggest thing we're trying to avoid is if we have processing on our master channel going out through the reference, through the Q send, and routing it through the control room, we bypass any processing that's going on here, because you don't want to take an existing mastered file and then run it through your master effects track for all the processing, so it's being processed twice and kind of lying to you as a reference. So let me know if that's helpful, Uno. All right, so we see how do you change the meter colors? So if you go to preferences, we'll just go to our preferences here. You'll see under metering, appearance, and then you could right click. And one thing that's a lot of people miss is that we could have, customized colors for each of the different metering types. So the ones that you want to use for the main channels in the mix console will be the plus 3 dB, and that's what we see in the channel meter. But in the control room, you may have different meters, and as we want to make changes here, you could just kind of create a new scale, come over here, change the colors as you see fit. So I know lots of audio engineers that would sit there and kind of change meters while the musicians weren't necessarily getting their parts down correctly. So we could go back to our default. So again, go to Preferences, which is under Edit menu on Windows. It's in the Cubase menu on Mac OS, and Metering to Appearance. All right, so we have Master Producer saying hello to everyone. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we see Gerald Ely just saying, Greg, your answer on the group versus VCA was clear. Thank you. So glad it made sense. All right, Jazzy Lamel asks, hey, Greg, hope all is well. Can you explain what can I use a selection tool for besides this selection of audio tracks? Okay, so there's a lot of things that we could do with the selection tools. There's one, I could do fade ins, fade outs. I could adjust the gain. I could edit fade ins or fade outs as I see fit. We could also adjust kind of on audio events. We could come over and adjust like where the events start. If I hold down the Alt or Option key and click, we could just come over and split the events without having to switch tools. If I wanted to move events with this tool, if I hold down the Alt or Option, Alt and Option or Control, you hold down Alt Control or Command Option, we could slip the audio within the events. We could also have different sizing modes. So if we go sizing moves contents, I could say I want the beginning of this event to kind of fall where it will. So I could say as I move the end clip here, we could say, okay, I need this ending to fall right here at time, or I need the beginning of this clip, or I need to make this clip fall into time stretch it to fit into that amount of time. We could switch to sizing applies time stretch. So there's a number of great things that you could do. Editing wise with your selection, you could also select multiple events. If we have multiple events on a clip and I wanted to select all of the events on this particular track, hold down the shift key and double click on the first event, and it will select all events on that track after that point. So this is just a couple of things you could do with the selection tool. Let me know if that's helpful. And great to see you on the live stream. All right, great to see Ziggy Edison on the live stream. Thanks for joining us. All right, so I just see a comment from Lars, and I'm not sure if I saw the first comment, but I just hear on the stereo bus, or would that cause any problems? So maybe, Lars, if you get a chance to re-ask the question, I'm not sure if I caught the very first one. I'm kind of scrolling up and seeing, but I'm afraid I may have missed the first part of the question. So maybe if you could ask the question again. Sorry about that. Sometimes on YouTube doesn't capture it. Then I see I meant on the mix bus, so. Okay, so we see from Mootlu, just says, how do we close the loaded VSTIs themselves at once rather than the windows of all instruments opened in the VST rack section? So if you want it to, let's say if we have a number of VST instruments here, if we wanted to get rid of these, I don't think that there's, I'll just do it on a new project here. So if it's instrument tracks and you wanted to get rid of, so let's come over. So let's say we have 4 instrument tracks here, and we can see that these are all loaded accordingly in our racks. So if we want to get rid of all of the racks here at once, if you select your instruments, select the instrument tracks on the project list, the project window, and then choose to remove selected tracks, then all of the instrument racks will disappear. So let me know if that's what you want to do, Mootlu. All right, so we see, hi Greg, I hope your wife is still doing great with recovery. Yep, she's been doing wonderful. It was actually the last 3 nights she's been able to sleep through the whole night, which is a welcome change for her. So yeah, she's doing great, so thanks for asking. So we see in Windows 10, the Steinberg mouse tips appear underneath the pointer, making them hard to read. Does it do the same for you? So let's say if I'm kind of on... just undo that change. So I think it's kind of the same, if this is what it looks like. So, I think that, there could be so many icons that, if you move, I'm not sure if I'll bring it to their attention that, I can see where the cursor may cover over the mouse tips. I'm not sure if that's kind of an operating system level control where it's going to be based on like where the cursor is instead of above it. But I'll bring that to their attention to see if that is something that could be changed. Thanks for bringing that to our attention, Ziggy. All right, so we see Cubase X is lurking and he's busy on a new song. We hope your song turns out well. Thanks for joining us today. All right, and Cubase X is a quick question: how to change the scale in a project from A sharp major to B flat major. So I think sometimes this may be like a goofy one where it stays A sharp. I haven't gotten a good answer on this, but let's try something here. So let's say, okay, I'm in B flat. Yeah, so I don't think, I haven't gotten a good, so I think even if we put in B flat that it's going to show as A sharp for the scale. I know we could change the chord, we could do the enharmonic shifts here, but we can't, I don't think we could do the, all right, so let's say if I, okay, so let's say if we're here, all right, I'm just going to erase this, so maybe the, all right, I'm just going to try to put it in. Yeah, I don't think, I've kind of been down this path before, but I think for some reason, like the scales, when we come here, like here the scale is different and only shows A sharp, which is, I agree, it's a little goofy. But I'll bring that, I know I brought it to their attention again, but I'll reach out to, I think, who I know the developer might be. But I know we could do it easily for the chord, but not for the scale. All right, so we see from camping and road trips. Hi, Greg. Is it possible to do a quick demo showing how to create an audio track with multiple sends, i.e. verb, delay, compression, etc.? Thanks. So, when we add an audio track, we'll come over and we'll see our audio track here. So if we wanted to add if we go to our we go to our sends, we can say, okay, I want to have a reverb. I want to add a delay. And let's say I want compression as an insert. Okay, so, you know, now that if we want to save these kind of all together as a single entity, because realize that we're sending it out to, like, you know, we could put our reverb and delay on a particular track. So let's say if I go to my sends here, I'll take these off for now. And if we go to, let's say, our mono delay, and I want this to go out to my reverb. Okay, so once we have that set, if we wanted to recall it, we could save it as a track preset. So we'll come over here, right click, and then we can save a track preset. So we'll just call it camping. So now if I wanted to add like that track with those particular plugins, if we come over to the media bay, we'll get a file. Let's go to, come to media bay, we'll go to user presets, track presets, audio, and we'll say camping, and now I will drag that over. Now if we wanted this instead of the effects, you know, if we wanted to include these going out to our sends, what we could do now is select those tracks and the sends and export the selected tracks, and we'll call it camping. And now when I do a new project that's empty, so we could export to selected tracks but import a track archive. So we'll come over here, say let's import track archive. Let's go to our desktop and we'll see camping. And now like the track, we'll select all the track with the different effect sends because they're on different tracks. We can now import those and all the effect sends will be carried over. All right. Okay, sorry. All right, so we see Braxel's joined us from Texas, saying he's super late. Sorry, you don't have to apologize for being late to a live stream. You just had to hit the like button, so that's all. Because according to Jazz Dude, we're probably at 98. So, all right. And we see Skylight's music show reels says consider it smashed. We appreciate that. All right, so a question from Braxel just says, Greg, if you are parallel compression with hardware, do you take each side of the compressor on its own channel and pan one left, right, or do you set up a stereo bus? Please advise. You know, so it could depend on if you're doing it for a stereo source or a mono source. So if it's a mono source, you want to be able to send it out to you want to be able to send it out to both stages of the hardware through like a send if you're doing it inside of Cubase. And if it's a stereo out, you'd probably need to have the stereo signal go to a stereo compressor and another stereo compressor to kind of blend between the two signals. So. All right, so we see hello from Morro Bay. So we see from Cubase X about the A sharp. So I think, and he says, really surprising to see A sharp in piano rolls. So I think if we come over, so let's say we have a chord track here. So let's see what happens when we do our chord track. All right, so let's say we have this. All right, so it sees it as A sharp, and let's go into MIDI part. All right, and we'll zoom in. Let me look at it in the full screen editor here. All right, so now and there is like a little preference. We'll see if this helps. We'll do our event display chords, and we'll do the enharmonics from chord track. So now that we've set that preference, we can see that in the editors here that we're going to see that they're going to be listed as B flat as opposed to A sharp. So again, once you have kind of the chords, it's not necessarily based on the scales, but if we go to your preferences, to event display chords, you can say enharmonics from chord track, and then it won't show A sharps in the editor, it will show them as B flats. So give that a try, Cubase X. Okay, so we see question, is there a way to assign random colors to a selection of parts? For example, if you have 5 parts and instead of coloring them one by one, you can randomize colors to each one with the key command. Okay, so let's say, I don't think it's random, but I think we could get different functions. So let's say if I have this here, and I'll just make some copies. So let's try going to Project Logical Editor. So this may be kind of in sequence, but if you want it to be just different colors for variations, I think this may work. Let's see if we can get it going. All right, let me just check a function here real quick. Oh, wrong one. All right, so we want to navigate right and I may have a macro that was created here. Let me just. All right, so let me just see if I. Okay, it's maybe a Project Logical Editor preset that I made. Let me see. Okay, so I just chose this to select beyond cursor on track, and we'll take a look at that. So that's going to be a Project Logical Editor. And then, all right, so if I'm here, have this track selected. I'll play around with it for Tuesday's live stream, but what you could do is kind of come over here and, you know, select this event, and we go to the next event and select all the events afterwards. And then there is a, so if I wanted to kind of colorize this, I think if they're all the same color to start with, and we go to our Project Logical Editor, we could take them, and we want to take transform. We'll say MIDI type is equal to, the container type is equal to Oh wait, hang on. Maybe I'll do this. Okay, so we're gonna say is equal to an event, and we'll say it's on selected track, and we'll say position is beyond cursor, and then what we want to do is set color, increment, and I will just come over here to navigate right. Okay, so if I'm here, yeah, I'll play around with it for Tuesday's live stream, but you know, we could do something like this. But if I just come over here and say let's increment our events here, we'll increment the color. Let me just some reason it's doing it on. But yeah, I'll play around with it for Tuesday's live stream. Sorry about that. And have it all kind of dialed in. Okay, so we see from Robert Higgins, I have several Cubase 12 projects on my D drive. What is the best way to back up those projects to another drive? Some of the audio files are all over the place on my D drive. So what you want to do is just come over and go to your file menu and choose to backup project. At this point, it's going to ask you for a new folder. You want to make a unique new folder on the drive that you want everything to be copied to. And at that point, we'll say new folder. We'll choose that folder. You could give it the project name. You could keep the current project active if you wanted to. You don't have to. We can minimize audio files. So this would allow you to, if we have a 3-minute guitar solo that you used 5 seconds of, to not export the 2 minutes and 55 seconds that was unused. But this will consolidate and move all of the files into the new location that you've defined. So just to do that, come over to your file menu to back up project. You just see some of his projects are getting out of hand. See, Greg, while everybody's asleep now, please open Cubase 13. So as soon as it's released, then, I don't have it on my system here. All right, we see Gareth has to take off. So great to see you on the live streams. Always wonderful to see you here. All right, so we see from Mutlu about the closing the instrument track. So it says, I think when you open it as an instrument track, we can select the channels and turn off all the instruments. If we open it as a rack instrument, only the tracks are deleted and the instruments remain. So that's the case. So if you have your rack instruments, you would need to basically come over and, like, if we added, let's say, our VSCI and we have our instrument rack, you would need to go through and get rid of just come here and choose no VST instrument, and that would get rid of the instrument, but you can't do that for multiple instruments. You'd have to do it one by one. So just choose no VST instrument, and then that will unload it, but you can't do it, in multiply. So if you have 20. All right, so I just see a question from Ziggy. Is there a way to make basic stick at the top of the track inspector? So let me just come over here. Let's get to their setup. So I think, let me select an audio track, a couple audio tracks. So I'm not sure what it is by when we go to, let's say, our inspector here, if this is the basic that we have, but that will, if you come to the setup window, you can change the order of these. So if I say, okay, I think that will be fixed at the top. Let's see if we move this down. So that may be fixed at the top so that all the parameters, like the main go-to parameters, are always there. So it looks like that is always going to be kind of stuck to the top. Let me just reread. All right, so we have Larry B checking in from Brampton, Ontario. Says always a great way to kick off the weekend with the Club Cubase live stream. Really love the shared learnings. Thanks to all. So. All right, so we see, hi Greg, regarding the upcoming rumors of Cubase 12 Pro, do you happen to know if bus folders are going to be a thing? So, or Cubase 13. So we can't comment on features until they're actually, released. But, realize that our folders are probably a bit more flexible than other programs and often contain stuff that don't have, an audio output. So, but if you wanted to come here, there's a built-in macro where you say, I want to take these audio tracks, and don't be scared by my list of macros. But there is a selected tracks, and I think there's 5 or 6 macros, but you'll see selected tracks to new folder and add group channel. So say, okay, I just want to call this drums, and now it's put them into a folder track, and it's created my group channel for me automatically. So I think it gets you to the same spot in the end. All right, so we see from DJ Stats, all right, Greg, Yamaha develops Vocaloid. Is there a chance we could see that type of software in future versions of Cubase? So I think it's, done by a different development team kind of within Yamaha. Obviously, it's a huge company and lots of different development teams. But I think, they're obviously trying to, and it's kind of, very popular in Japan for kind of virtual karaoke stuff, and it's kind of, very popular in Japan for that, where you have kind of animation and anima characters that are doing, concerts and stuff like that. But it hasn't, culturally, I don't think it's spread as much. So I'm not sure if it would go into Cubase or it'd still remain kind of its own separate entity. So I have a feeling it will be kind of its own separate entity for a while. All right, so we see from Kevin Mehmed, great to see on the live stream. Will Dorco Pro ever go on sale this year? I need to get help with my musical ability with the chord track. So, Dorco has been on sale already I think twice this year. So I'm not sure what the next time, generally we don't announce when it's going to be on sale ahead of time, but, there are promotions throughout the year. So. All right, we see Gerald Ely has to take off, so have a wonderful weekend, and thanks for joining us today on the live stream. All right, so Jazzy Lamel just says, hey Greg, I saw in our chat that there's a way to remove silence from audio tracks automatically in Cubase. Can you explain? So really all you have to do, so let me just grab a couple files here. All right, and I'll just put some space between them. So let me just. All right, and let me just render these quickly. Okay, so let's say we have an audio file that has space between them. We want to get rid of all the dead space. All we have to do is select the file, go to your audio menu, and we'll go to advanced, and you'll see detect silence. Here we could kind of set a threshold, and then at this point we could analyze, set the threshold, and hit process. And now anything that was below that threshold can now be erased and no longer take hard drive space. So once again, once you have this set up, come over to audio. We will go to advanced to detect silence. See, Cubase X says, I personally don't understand the rush for Cubase 13 or so much. That's so cool in the current version. So. All right, so we see from Camping and Road Trips, thanks for the demo about sends. Can you show them in action applying the sends, etc.? Thank you, Greg. All right, so let's take a look. All right, so let's say we have. So I'm going to come over here. Let's just add a send. So if I want to put we have our reverb here. Let's say I put a delay on. So I'm going to turn the delay on. And now we can see that so if I wanted to have less of this, if I wanted to add more of the send in here, I'll just say, let's go to the reverb.
It's you and I having dinner on
so what this is doing is it's sending this signal out to our reverb channel, our reverb return channel. So now as we kind of just listen to it, we'll have more reverb. So we're adjusting the balance between dry and wet. So as we just kind of come over here.
in the air.
So we say, let's make this.
What dimension am I in?
So that's how you could kind of use the sends and kind of blend and find that sweet balance between what is the what is the dry signal that's unaffected and just blending in the effects. See, Ziggy Edison agrees that it says that 12 is enough for me. So, well, maybe when you see 13, you'll go, oh, I need that when it comes out and is available. Okay, so we see from Ziggy Edison saying I would like basic to open whenever the track is as I change. So let's say if I come here, let's go to our setup. Let's see if it's pinnable. We showed earlier. Doesn't look like it's pinnable here. Because I think as long as it is open, that when you go to switch between different tracks here, that we are able, so unless it's specifically closed, by default, it is open by default. All right, so we see a question. Hey, Greg, is there a way to get rid of using my dongle for Wavelab 11? So you could go to, if you update to Wavelab 11.2, download that. You'll see in your My Steinberg account that when you go to your My Steinberg account, log in, and then you'll see vouchers. And so you'll see you'll see all your different products. So go to your My Steinberg, log in with your credentials, and go to vouchers. And then basically you could migrate your license from the USB-E licenser directly to the new Steinberg licensing system. So you can, 11.1 and 11.1 could run on either. 11.2 is running strictly on the new Steinberg licensing, so you don't need to use you do not need to use the USB-E licenser for that, and that version won't work with USB-E licensors. All right, so we see a question from Kevin. In Dorco Pro 5, can you use it inside of Cubase Pro 12? Does it make the chord track unlimited in Cubase Pro 12, which I have? So, you have a chord display. So there's two separate applications. So, if you have a project in Dorco, it's not going to immediately open in Cubase. Dorco doesn't run as a subset within functions within Cubase. It's its own separate, dedicated notation solution. And I think you could, have very similar chord functionalities. There's going to be some other stuff like, within Dorco, you could have it output to Nashville number system, stuff like that. That's not available in Cubase, but I don't think it gives you more chords. All right, so Michael Pierce wants to Dave the Songle. Poor man. We'll have to come up with a character named Dave the Songle. All right. All right, so I think we're at the end of questions. Let me see if there's any others that kind of sneak in. We see Cubase X as new problem with the faults of the electric bass. I got confused with forcing strings. Now I have E flats. I'll play with it. So. All right, we'll see if there's any more questions that come in. If not, we could wrap up a little early. I want to thank everyone for all the wonderful questions and I'll play some more on getting the Project Logical editor or macro to colorize tracks and have that for Tuesday. All right, so we see from Kevin Mehmed, says, can you load Dorco Pro 5 so I can see if I would like to buy what it looks like? So there are trial versions. And with Dorco, there's also a Dorco SE that's free. So if you need to do just kind of a limited number of staves, you could do that. And, so I encourage everyone to check out Dorco SE. And you could get that for Mac or Windows or iOS devices. Sorry for hitting my mic. All right. So we see Michael Pierce just says, great session, stuck at home with a COVID house friend. So I'm going to certainly get my question to you through over the weekend. Have a great weekend. All right. Well, we hope that you or your friend that has COVID gets well soon, and it's a mild case. All right, so we just see a nice comment from Jazzy Lamel. Just says, hey, Greg, I just want to say thank you for all the years of doing this. It really helps everyone out here. Much appreciated. Yeah, so I think we're kind of at 3.5 years almost, as of maybe Tuesday, just about 3.5 years. Now my cat is wanting me to feed him. Okay, I'll be done in a little bit, Stephen. Okay. All right, we'll give it another 30 seconds, see if there's any other comments or questions, and if not, we'll wrap up. I appreciate everyone spending part of your morning, evening, afternoon learning more about Steinberg products. And, really grateful that everyone's able to be part of such a wonderful community. I really appreciate all the help from everyone, Jazz Dude, Agent K, as well as Jan on Cubase Index. And if people want kind of a Word file of every one of the 27,000 questions that you could search and navigate with hyperlinks to the video, feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to share that info with anyone. I think it's on the Cubase Nation Discord. I sent it over to Jazz Dude, so it could be available there. Okay, so I guess we are out of questions, and with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Everyone, please have a wonderful, safe weekend, and we'll see everyone back on Tuesday at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, and look forward to seeing everyone back. And tell your friends, have them come on and check out the Club Cubase live streams, and we'll see you back on Tuesday. Goodbye.